Welcome to another video from Oklahoma DEQ. This will hopefully help you understand how to use SLEIS, the State and Local Emissions Inventory System, just a little bit better. We posted a number of videos last year, and we'll post a few more in addition to this one this year. We wanted to cover some topics that are a little bit different or in some cases more in depth than what we covered last year. And to that point, what I will be doing is going through how to get the emissions data, calculations data into SLEIS so that you don't have to perform the calculations and that SLEIS can do it for you. Before I go any further, my name is Grant Loney, a member of the emissions inventory section. And I will provide contact information for myself as well as some other members of our section towards the end of today's presentation. So like I said, unlike last year where we spent a lot of time focusing on how to set up your calculations to perform them manually and how to cross out the different units to get them, to make sure you had the calculation set up correctly. This time our focus is going to be more on how to just get that data into the platform and let it take care of some of that math stuff for you. Since this is now the second year that we will be using SLEIS, there's a couple of important things to point out. One is that a lot of the data from last year will be carried forward to this year. In particular, the throughput unit, but not the value, the emission factors, SCCs, and pollutants, all of these are carried forward. So the main things, the main data that you're going to have to come up with and enter this year is going to be the throughput, the value, the hours, days, and weeks of operation, and then the emissions. You're not going to have to get everything unless stuff is changing. So let's get logged into SLEIS. So we're at our homepage already. There's several links on our website. Hopefully you know how to find it. And I'm going to be logging in here as a facility user. So I should see just about like what you see when we first log in. We come to the My Companies page, and we can see here every company that I have any role with and the roles that I have at that company. And we're going to be working with company C today. So I'm going to open that company. Notice we have two buttons here. We have the first one on the left is just for, it says open, and then the one on the right says open for batch processes or for batch operations. Today, we are not going to be doing any batch operations. We're just going to open it and work with this facility in the application. Now, when we clicked on the company, we now see every facility associated with that company. And the one we're going to be working with today is this number 3 right here. So I'm going to click one more time the open button. And then when we open the facility, we then see every report that this facility has had and the status of those reports. We can see we have submitted every report we were required to submit prior to 2020, and we're going to be working on the 2020 report today. So let's open that. Notice you have several buttons up top here in what is called the facility inventory. Anytime any equipment changes, if you're adding equipment, taking it away, setting it to temporarily shut down, those types of things will all be done first up here in the facility inventory. Only after you have completed all of the changes that you need to make in the facility inventory should you come down here to start working on the process emissions. So I've already got the facility inventory set up, for example, today, so I'm not going to be working up there. So I'm going to come straight down here to the process emissions because we want to see some examples of the auto calculation and how it's working. So our first example, we're going to look at this example boiler. So I said earlier that you need to come up with or collect and then input into SLEIS 3 pieces of information, 3 main pieces: the throughput, the annual throughput that we see here, the hours, days, and weeks of operations, that'll be on the operations tab, and then the emissions that are going to be on the emissions tab. In order to get our auto calculation features in SLEIS to function, we need to make absolutely sure that the emission factor unit matches this throughput unit that you see in the throughput combination box there. The throughput combinations that you see that are presented to you in this throughput combination box are dependent upon the SCC. So in this case, our SCC is 101-00601, which gives us two possible throughput combinations in this box. One with a throughput in million cubic feet of natural gas, and the other emission factor in million BTUs of heat. Now, it's important to make sure that you pick the correct throughput combination, because the emission factors that SLEIS will present to you when we get to that tab here in just a minute are going to be based on both the SCC that you have selected and the emission factor unit, or excuse me, the throughput unit, which will need to match the emission factor unit. So let's put some data in here and look at this functioning the way that we want it to, that it's supposed to. So first things first, we're going to put in a annual throughput. In this case here, we're going to put in 500. So this shows that over this year, this particular boiler had an input of 500 million cubic feet of natural gas. And then our operations, this boiler, let's just say it operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And then you'll notice that SLEIS will go ahead and calculate the actual hours per year for you after you put in those first three values. All of those values are required. So if you are only keeping track of the total number of hours per year, you might want to think about how you're collecting that data and whether you should be collecting it at a more granular level. Also notice that 8784 is our calculated hours per year this year. That's because 2020 is a leap year. So we have that extra day, so those extra 24 hours, in case you're expecting it to say 8760, like other years. Since it's operated all year long, the seasonal fraction is going to be 25% of the time in each season. So we're going to put that in there. Notice these are whole number fractions, so it is 25%, not 0.25 or anything like that. Let's go to the emissions tab now. So we're going to have two pollutants here that we're going to put in today, carbon monoxide and NOx. So we notice that those are already carried forward from last year, like we said, and the emission factor is already there from last year. For carbon monoxide, that's 84 pounds per million cubic feet. And if we have everything set up correctly, which is to say that our emission factor unit matches our throughput unit, and we have selected a calculation method that supports the auto calculation, which this one does, the 8_3 US EPA documents, including AP42, is a calculation method that supports auto calculation. Most of the options that have an emission factor, so any of these no control, pre-control, post-control, most of those will support the auto calculation. We already have the correct one here. This was carried forward from last year, so I'm going to click it again just to confirm. And then the only thing that we need to do here to get the estimated emissions input where they belong is right over here. There is this calculate button. If I click it, there it is. Calculate estimated emissions right here. 21 tons. If you actually did the math yourself, you would also see that 500 million cubic feet of natural gas times our emission factor of 84 pounds per million cubic feet, and then convert that to tons, does indeed come out to 21 tons. So this is Let's do one more with Knox just to show you real quick again. If you have everything in here correctly, if you've got all the data already in from last year, emission factors, you put in your new throughput, all of our units match, all you got to do, click this calculate button, and it will give us the calculated or estimated emissions. So like I said, you must make sure that the throughput units and emission factor units match in order for the auto calculation features to work. Additionally, like I said, the emission factors that are presented to you are based on the throughput unit you select. To show you that, I'm going to go back now to our process and just change our throughput combination, our throughput unit. For now, just for the sake of ease, we're going to leave our annual throughput. Let's change this to million BTU now, and I'll get a pop-up that says that making this change will change our calculated emissions. And do we want to continue? And yes, we do. For the sake of example, we do want to continue. Nothing changed here on the operations tab. Just wanted to point that out. And now we come back over here to the emissions tab, and notice now the emission factor is gone. There's no factor there anymore. We can click this button, which is the button to try and find a factor if SLEIS has one, but we click it and it says there are no matches on the current emission for a factor / formula. And this is again because this is the wrong throughput unit. So if you encounter a situation like this where you feel there should be an emission factor and SLEIS tells you there is not one, check your throughput. Maybe you have the wrong emission or the wrong throughput, and so it's not pulling an emission factor, whereas I just changed it back to the correct throughput unit. And if I select this button again, now it's pulling that correct AP42 factor. I can select it, and there we go. My emissions are once more correctly calculated at 21 tons of carbon monoxide. So that's your big things. You want to make sure you selected the right SCC, the right throughput combination, and once again that you've selected a calculation method that supports auto calculation. If we had selected everything else perfectly, but had selected no emission factor, 8_0, no emission factor, now nothing's there in our emission factor value, nothing there for our emission factor unit, and then it just wants me to type in tons of emissions. Not what we want in this situation. Much better to select the calculation method that actually has an emission factor and supports the auto calculation. There we are. So we're not quite done with this one. The only thing we have left to do for this is to save it. And if you save it and you get a red box right here, that means you've got problems and you need to fix those problems. Let's find out what our problems might be. Okay, we didn't have any estimated emissions. That's our problem because we switched our emission, our throughput unit, which cleared everything, and we switched it back, which did not re-input that data. So that's another thing to watch out for. Real easy to get it back. Just click this thing again to get your factor back. Notice there are two different options for us. If you see these different options, you need to research to find out which one is the right one for you. You can kind of hover over. Oftentimes it has to do with either the year or the load. Again, research it to figure out what the proper one is. In this case, it's the 190. And there we go. There's our estimated emissions one more time. Let's try saving it again, see if it'll work this time. And there it is. When we get this blue banner up top that the process emissions was successfully updated, we know we did it correctly and we are done with this particular emission unit. I want to talk about controls in SLEIS and a few problems that we have seen or that we saw with controls when we were doing QC on the 2019 inventories. So in this particular example, what I want to look at is situations where a control device was connected to a process, but it should not have been. Let me show you what we're talking about here. So again, thinking about our auto calculation, we've got our throughput in here already, 1,000 million BTUs of heat. Already got our operations in here, the same 87, 84. And now let's look at our emissions here. So if you notice, even when there is no control, such as here where it says no control EF, it will still display a control efficiency. Okay, we're all good here this time because, or it looks like we're okay for now anyway, because we have no control with our carbon monoxide with a 0% control efficiency. And when we look at our NOx, we have a pre-control calculation method. Let me go a little bit slower so you can see that. 8_2 is a pre-control emission factor, which means that we should apply a control after this. And here's our control efficiency. Okay, so this looks okay, but let me show you something. What happens if, and now look again here. So a pre-control, meaning the calculation was performed with the emission factor, and then after that we applied the control efficiency of 70% for this total of 0.3405 tons of emissions. But let's see what happens if we change this to no control. Okay, we're going to select our factor. And look what happened. This says no control, right? 8_3, no control. There should not be any control device attached to this process. There should not be any controls taken into account when we calculate these emissions. But look, this still says 70% control efficiency right here. And if you notice, the estimated emissions did not change. They still say 0.3405, which is the calculation that was performed with a control device. So there's a few reasons why this is a problem, and you can already see one of them. One of them is you could indicate that this has a control device or does not have a control device, and this is not affecting the calculation of those emissions. There's actually two other places where you might want to look at this and see if anything needs to be done. So the other two places that you would want to look here, you want to look at the actual control device and at the process. You want to see not only is this process controlled at all? Should there be a control device at all? You also want to look at, should this pollutant, should nitrogen oxides be controlled by this control device? We're going to look in a few different places so you can see all these things, because clearly we know that this is not right. You should never have a no control with a control device in place. It should either be pre-control with a control device, or there should not be a control device, or perhaps that control device is in place at the proper process, but it should not control that pollutant. So let's look around to see where we can find those things. It's a little bit tricky because you might think you would want to go straight to just clicking on the control device, but I'm actually going to say that that's probably a difficult way to do it. It's easier to go to the process identifier right here, and then we can just click on it. And then now we're on the process page, and we can look at the control approach. And this says we do have a control approach. It's an SCR. It's just called example SCR, and it captures the entire gas stream and is up all of that year. So if this is correct and the process is controlled, this is how we want it to be. If the process should not be controlled, then you can just click this little button right here that says not controlled. And then if that's the case, you can just save it I think this process should be controlled, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that so that stays as controlled. And then if you determine that the process should indeed be controlled, but you just need to adjust the pollutants that are being controlled, then that's where you can go to the control device. There's probably a whole list here. We know that the title of this control device is example SCR. We already saw that a minute ago, so we can just find the example SCR. We do want to open to edit, so we're going to click the second gear button, not just the magnifying glass view. So click to edit. And then we can see here all the pollutants that are being controlled by this control device. Currently, that's just nitrogen oxides at 70%. If NOx should not be controlled by this control device, we can click this trash can icon to remove NOx as a pollutant being controlled by the control device. Or if we think additional pollutants, such as carbon monoxide, should be controlled by this control device, then we can click add, and we can add CO at, say, oh, I don't know, maybe this is 90% control. Just for the sake of argument, let's just do that for now. Let's save it. Let's see what happens. It's probably going to tell us that it's going to recalculate some emissions for us. There it is. There's a blue warning here. Estimated emissions have been recalculated where applicable. Let's go and look and see what that means. What's been recalculated? So backing up a bit, coming back over to our process emissions. Again, we're working in our example engine right now. Let's look over at our emissions, and we see that the NOx is still controlled by this control device at 70%. And let's look at CO. Again, we say no control. This still says no control. We didn't make any changes to our control device. But since we added carbon monoxide as a pollutant that is being controlled by this control device at this process, here it is. There's that 90% control efficiency. And you notice that no longer do we have the same estimated emissions. We now have emissions that are being reduced by 90% based upon this control device. So please make sure that your pollutants and processes are correctly controlled and that you select the correct calculation methods for those pollutants and situations. If a pollutant is controlled by a control device, it needs to have a calculation method that indicates that it is being controlled, a pre-control or in some cases a post-control calculation method. And if a pollutant is being controlled by a control device, it needs, you really need to make sure that it has a calculation method that indicates as such. And the opposite's true. If it is not controlled, make sure it's removed from everything. It's the reason I'm spending so much time on this is it's really difficult for us to tell how to fix the problem. We can see that a problem exists, but because you could fix it in one of three or maybe more than one of three different places, which is the calculation method, the process, or the device itself, we can't tell which of those three is the proper place to fix it. So we're going to rely heavily on you to make sure that you get that data input correctly. We want to talk now about the template files. I'm not going to go as heavily into this as we did last year because we did do a whole video on templates and how to use the templates last year. So we're going to do a little bit of that, but not quite as in depth. As I mentioned earlier, but I want to hit it again, you want to always start every inventory by making any adjustments that you need to make in the facility inventory. Even if you are going to be using the templates to input your emissions, you will need to make any adjustments in the facility inventory first. Then, after you've made all of those adjustments in the facility inventory, you've added all of the equipment you need to add, you've set to temporarily or permanently shut down all of the equipment that you need to do that to. After you've done all of that, then you can click download template right here. And When you do that, you'll have to give it a minute. It'll take a little bit of time for SLEIS to process your request, and then you will get an email with a link for you to download your template files. I have already done that. So let me grab those files and show you what they look like. There's going to be about 6 files that are downloaded all in one zip file. There's 2 that are the most important. That's these 2 right here, processes.csv and processemissions.csv. Let's open those up. I have already filled these templates out just to make our life easier. That's the weirdest. There we go. So what we see here is some information about the processes that we're reporting for, SCC, all this, a bunch of the stuff. The stuff in this tab is going to be information that is contained in the first 2 tabs of here, of the process emissions. So this processes.csv file contains all the data that would be either in the process tab, like I'm in now, with the annual throughput and the throughput combination, as well as SCC, process identifier. It also contains the data in this operations tab, the hours per day, days per week, weeks per year, etc. Then the second file, the process emissions.csv, is going to contain the emissions data, the process emissions data. Once again, I've already filled in a bunch of this stuff. I want to point out one field in particular, and that's this one right here. The reason I'm pointing this out is because that number is wrong. And I know it's wrong because I calculated these emissions and I put in a number that is very wrong on purpose. And I did this because I wanted to point out that even when you are using these template files to upload data into SLEIS, SLEIS will still undergo the auto calculation process if it is able to. Again, what makes it able to? It's having the proper calculation method, and it's having the throughput unit and the emission factor unit match each other. So if we look at this one, I've got my calculation method right there, 8_3. That's the main one we've been talking about today. So yes, that one does support auto calculation. Notice there my emission factor unit, E6FT3, that is million cubic feet. And then let's look at our other tab. I guess we need to keep in mind our process ID, this one right here, 3117017. We come back over here, 311717. We can see that our throughput unit is also E6FT3, or million cubic feet. So we do expect that when these files, oops, wrong thing, when these files are uploaded to SLEIS, that SLEIS would do the auto calculation and it will overwrite this. Despite me saying that there's 190 tons of NOx at this process, when SLEIS imports the data, it will do the auto calculation based upon our emission factor and our throughput. I'm sorry, that's the wrong thing. That's the wrong number. That number is okay. Excuse me. There we go. This is actually the incorrect number, the 210 tons. That's the wrong one. The 190 tons as the emission factor for NOx, that was correct. I highlighted the wrong number at first. So this is where SLEIS will overwrite the calculated emissions value, because it will see that the throughput that we entered times the emission factor is not going to produce 210 tons of emissions. So we're going to just real briefly show you how to import these files. You're just going to import the data, and then it's going to ask you for a process.csv file, and then it's going to ask you for a process emissions.csv file. Let's close both of these first before I didn't make it. The only change I made was highlighting it. I'm not going to save it. I don't make any changes that are important right now. Just open it up to look at it and show you. So let's close both those files. And then if we wanted to upload them, we just find them, processes.csv, process emissions.csv. You notice that there is one more box here for a process supplemental parameters file. This file is not required. As in all areas of SLEIS, this little red bar indicates a requirement. Notice that these first two are required and this last one is not required. So we can just continue at this point. And there we go. We successfully imported 3 records and 7. There's 3 process records and 7 process emissions records. Let's look back at our process emissions records. Remember, our example boiler with this 311717 identifier was the one we were looking at in detail in our spreadsheets. And we're going to look at the process emissions. There it is. Look at that. 21 tons. Remember, in our spreadsheet, we had 210 tons. And I told you 210 was wrong and that SLEIS would not input 210. And there it is. There's your proof that when SLEIS did the auto calculation, it calculated 21 tons and it entered 21 tons of emissions, not 210. Let's look at a little bit more stuff in the application. We're done with the templates for now. Again, there is a video we did last year that goes way more in depth about the template files and the bulk processes if you would like to see those. But for now, I want to look at a little bit more stuff in the application. So far, the calculations that we've done or that we've seen in the application were instances where SLEIS could pull up an emission factor based upon the data that we had already entered into SLEIS. We're going to do one this time where SLEIS does auto-calculate the emissions, but it is not pulling an AP42 factor because we know that not every instance of emissions being reported to us are from AP42 factors. So we're going to look at an example spray booth here and look at calculation of a couple different pollutants. This one, like I say, we're going to look at it, something that's quite a bit different. So we're going to actually look at our supplemental calculation parameters down here. So in this situation, we're looking at an example spray booth, which uses several different types of coats and primers. For the sake of simplicity here, we're just doing our example based upon just one of those. Let's just assume that they use just one paint just to make our lives easy with our example. And let's say that this paint, we found a safety data sheet or SDS about this paint, and we found out that the whole thing has a density of 7.8 pounds per unit. Our unit is based on our units up here. So our unit is gallons because our throughput unit of measure is gallons based upon our throughput combination. So when this thing down here says unit, it means gallons. So 7.8 pounds per gallon is what the whole paint is. And then this says that 60% of that paint is emitted VOC. Again, this is information you can get from your safety data sheet. Oftentimes, these data sheets will have an emission factor specifically for VOC. But if it doesn't have that and all it gives you is density of the product and percent volatiles, then you can come up with it like this. So again, we're going to look at our operations. You know, maybe these aren't realistic for a spray booth. Maybe we want to be more realistic. Maybe the spray booth actually really only operated, say, maybe 6 hours a day, maybe only 5 hours a week. Oh, let's say they had a couple weeks of vacation. Let's say they only operated 48 hours a year. Okay, notice there, something interesting just happened. This still says 8760. We know that's not right because 8760 would be 24/7/52. So let's try this again. What if we just erase that? And then I think all we need to do is even erase just one of those. And hopefully, there it is. Now it recalculated for us. And yeah, the 25% in each season is fine. Looking at our emissions here now. Okay, let's see. What is this? Let me what we want here is actually something a little bit different than what it shows. We want this to have a mass balance with no control. So let me show you what happens when you say when you select mass balance. When you select mass balance, what SLEIS wants to give you for your factor or formula is density times VOC over 100. So this is why I pointed out earlier what density we put in for the product and what percent VOC. So this is going to be the density of the product times 60 over 100. And that's going to give us an emission factor of 4.71 pounds per gallon. And so 4.71 pounds per gallon times the 800 gallons that we had put in is estimated emissions of 1.884 tons of VOC. Now, what about xylenes? Xylenes are a particular VOC. In this case, we found information on the data sheet saying that 50% of all VOCs that are emitted are xylenes. So the easiest thing to do there, then now that we have already calculated our total VOC emission factor of 4.71, which SLEIS did that for us again from the density and the VOC. If we know that xylenes, because we've done some testing on our site, we've gathered these data, we know this to be true, then the simplest thing to do would be to just divide this emission factor in half. So 4.71 divided by 2 is hopefully 2.355. Notice this time we are using the DEQ approved method as our calculation method. In order to use the DEQ approved method, you actually, as it suggests, need to get DEQ's approval. So in this example, we're going to assume that we did get DEQ's approval, that we submitted some form of data to DEQ showing that yes, the xylenes are indeed 50% of the VOCs. So notice the difference in how these boxes look. These ones, emission factor unit, and estimated emissions are all grayed out. They're all grayed out because SLEIS is able to get that data for us. It's pulling emission factor data based upon what we've already told it about the density and the VOC, as well as the calculation method. So it doesn't want us messing with those at all. It can do it itself. However, when we select a different calculation method, say DEQ approved method in this case, now we were required to give it an emission factor in emission factor units. And again, I know I've said this several times, but I'm saying it again. In order to take advantage of the auto calculation in SLEIS, the emission factor unit, in this case gallons, must match the throughput unit. If I selected something different, say even 1,000 gallons, now, okay, it removes all that. Let's just say I think it should be the same thing. I know it shouldn't. We should change our units, but let's just say we think it should be the same. Notice it will not auto-calculate. It requires me to type in something here, okay? But when we select the correct units, which is to say the matching units, then SLEIS will once more calculate these emissions for us, 2.355. And we're going to select calculate, and there we go. And so not only should the emission factor be for xylenes be half of the emission factor for total VOC, but the estimated emissions for xylenes should be exactly half of the estimated emissions for total VOC. So just one more way you can kind of check that to make sure that SLEIS is doing it all correctly for you. Once you think it's in there correctly, click Save. As we saw earlier, if something's wrong, you'll get a red banner telling you have errors and you need to correct it. And if you did it correctly, you'll have this blue banner telling you stuff was successfully updated. And then once all of your processes are successfully updated, you're ready to validate your report, correct any validation errors that you might have and get your submitter to submit it. One more time, I want to point you to the videos that we posted last year. Let me show you where those are. From DEQ's homepage, or actually, let's just start from Google. Let's say, okay, DEQ, yeah, let's just go there. Okay, so hopefully your search engine will take you pretty closely here to here's DEQ's homepage, and then you can hover over the banners or the banner for divisions, and then emissions inventory under the air quality division, and then under emissions inventory here, the emissions inventory workshop. And then here we go. Here's all of our videos from last year. And this is likely the place we will post videos this year. Yeah, so again, I am Grant Loney. If you need my contact information, that is also on DEQ's website, as well as my other emissions inventory colleagues. Here's our phone numbers, and you can even email us right from here. Or you can also get in contact with us through the SLEIS homepage. There is both the common inbox that all emissions inventory staff checks, as well as the air quality main number, or a more direct way of communicating is by submitting a question or comment right here. Please note this note right here. We will not be able to respond to your questions if you use this link but don't include your contact information. Your contact information is not automatically included when you submit a question through this. So please include your contact info if you want a response to your question. One other thing I want to point out on DEQ's website is a new tool that was created by members of our permitting section, specifically a tool to help calculate storage tank emissions. And sorry, I might have gone a little faster. Let's go a little bit slower. So I was over here, I'm in the air quality section, over in the permits part, I went to permit guidance, and then the oil and natural gas tab, and then this new, though I don't know how long it'll say new, storage tank emissions calculation tool. This was, like I said, created by members of Oklahoma DEQ's permitting section in response to, or because we needed a new program to calculate the storage tank emissions after the updates to AP42. So if you do a bunch of storage tank calculations, you might want to make note of that. And one more time, I'm Grant Loney, and you've seen my phone number now, 405-702-4212. Give me a call or send an email if you need anything. Thanks, and have a nice day.